It is seriously expensive to be a human on planet Earth, but these 10 cities take it to a whole new level.
Think your cost of living is high? You should try living in one of these cities. The list of the 10 most expensive cities includes Paris, Oslo, Zurich, Sydney, Melbourne, Geneva, Copenhagen, Hong Kong, Seoul, New York, and Singapore taking the top spot. The Worldwide Cost of Living Report compares 133 cities, with New York City set as the standard base for the study. According to the report, a loaf of bread, a bottle of wine, and a pack of cigarettes in Singapore will set a customer back $39.11.
All right, so we all lived in New York City at different times in our lives. Was cost one of the reasons you got the hell out of there?
I don't know. Back when I lived in New York City, it was cheap. You know, it was like, it wasn't so
when
crazy.
Was that, the 50s? What are you talking about?
I lived there in 2003, I guess, when you could still live in Manhattan, but you can't live in Manhattan anymore. I mean, that's just out of the question. You can't even live in Williamsburg anymore, and that's out of the question. And now people are just moving further and further out. I'm upset that our own Los Angeles didn't even make that list.
Yeah, so speaking of Los Angeles, you're happy.
That it didn't make the most expensive cities to live
It
list?
seems like a really expensive city here.
Oh.
Well, I lived in New York my entire life, New York City the last like 10 years or so, and I moved to LA 2 years ago, and I still, when I go to the supermarket or when I just buy anything or gas, whatever it is, I still can't believe how cheap it is here. And I know it's not really cheap, but that's just because New York is bonkers.
So when I lived in New York, I was couch surfing, living in bunk beds, and like eating pizza every day. So I was spending no money. I was an unpaid intern. And being a girl, I'm not gonna lie, it's much easier to get things for free.
But that's not a sustainable sort of lifestyle plan.
No, it just means like you can go out and like drinks are bought, or you can go out and food is bought. I'm not talking about like turning tricks. I'm just saying
we can't go out and get drinks bought for us? Come on now.
People buy us dinner all the time.
I've bought Bryn drinks before.
Yeah, and vice versa.
And he's bought drinks for me. So.
But this is not a sustainable way that people can live their life of just, this is what probably hustlers do and like criminals do. No, I'm just saying you can't sort of compare the lifestyle of somebody else.
The point is she thrived in New York City,
yes,
I think is the point that you were trying to make.
Well, I had a great time and I didn't end up leaving because it was too expensive. I had opportunities elsewhere. It was more like this city is so exciting and there are ways to get by that I found where you weren't spending a ton of money. But I also imagine that if you are making a living or raising a family or doing anything like that where you have to be spending money and not sleeping on couches, then...
I think the problem with these places happens when, like in New York, where everybody moved out of the city and then everybody moved out of Williamsburg and further, you just lose the core of who your artists are who at least could afford to live there in the first place. What makes the top of the list? What was the top? Singapore?
Singapore.
Wow.
Yeah. Are we going to Singapore? Can we take the show on the road to Singapore? Maybe see what's going on in Singapore?
I think we should try to find that out.
Did any of those cities shock you? I mean, Paris, obviously, like a bunch of them, Zurich, like these seem like expensive places to live.
It was interesting to me that so many of them were in Asia, where at the same time you have some of the most poverty also in the entire world, and often like within the same city itself, right? I mean, we were in Port-au-Prince a couple of weeks ago in Cité Soleil, which is the poorest neighborhood essentially in the Western Hemisphere. And this idea that you can live there, and everyone does, off of an average of what, $300 a month, and like people are dancing and people are happy, and you go to New York and you're in the subway and people are pissed and just fucking depressed. Like, it just goes to show that how much you're making and where you're living and all that is so relative.
You beat me to my final question, the correlation. Do you think so? You guys think there's no correlation? Because I agree with that. Even I went back to New York a couple of weeks ago, and that subway thing, you see these miserable people, and then it gets on you. You actually feel it versus you live in some other cities. I mean, there's plenty of people that live on beaches. They're pretty happy, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they don't have as much money.
It may also have to do with the proximity to wealth that makes you consider your situation as poor. You know, and we were talking about this too, this idea of if you don't know that you don't have much because there's no relative comparison to someone who does have a lot, you can maybe be happier than if you're in a city like Singapore or Zurich or Paris or New York, where there are the homeless and the extraordinarily wealthy living side by side, that on both ways, right? There's a sense of inequality and unfairness to that for people on both sides of it.
Yeah, but it's also in Port-au-Prince is just a great city, and you have all the freedoms in the world to do whatever you want. And then in Singapore, you can't even spit gum out on the street, you know. So that's it. You're not going to find the happiest people there, that's for sure.
So final thought to your point, how important is having that artist community, that sort of area where people can escape to create? That's a huge part of what's important about a city, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's the most important part, right? Like you have to have, you have to have a place where people are creating and also paying homage to the city that they're living in. I mean, that's where you find the heart and soul of these places is always in the artist districts and very rarely in the financial districts. No offense. Or offense.
There's not a lot of creative people. They're creative financially, but that's about it. Anyway, what do you think? Do you guys live in any of these 10 cities? We want to know how you're surviving over there. Let us know in the comments right down below.